Welcome to the June 2026 edition of FO Exclusive. With me is Glenn Carle, Senior Partner at FOI. He's a retired CIA officer. He's a noted geopolitical analyst. He is the author of The Interrogator. He, together with others at FOI, advises companies, investors, and organizations on geopolitical risk. I am Atul Singh. I am the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer. We have more than 3,000 authors from over 90 countries. We look at the deeper issues behind the news, provide context and many perspectives from around the world. I'm also a partner at FOI. FO Exclusive is a recap and analysis of the most important issues of the world. One of our friends, a chap on Capitol Hill, called it a compulsory listen, watch, if you want an in-depth understanding of what's going on and if you're interested in making sense of the world. So without further ado, we'll crack on. Last month, we discussed a tale of two summits in Beijing. We discussed great dangers to the global economy. This month, we will focus on two key issues. Number one, Iran trumps Trump in new art of the deal. Number two, Keir Starmer falls to the King of the North. Before we carry on, we will do our lightning round as usual, and we will recap the most important issues of the month. So here we go, the lightning round. Well, let's begin with SpaceX. We are spoiled for choice this month, as we are almost every month, and the challenge is what to leave out instead of what to leave in. But we'll begin with SpaceX because it had a momentous, mountainous initial public offering, an IPO. And this IPO is being talked about all around the world. A lot of people think it is a tribute to Elon Musk's genius. There are many, however, who say that this is not entirely so. And Osama Malik, one of our authors, has penned a wonderful piece called Paid in Mars, How the SpaceX IPO Engineers Away Accountability. And Osama's argument is SpaceX IPO is not a marker of company success, but rather indicative of an eroding market. Systems are being quietly rewritten to make exceptions for the few at the cost of established financial institutions. The precedent SpaceX and Elon Musk set may shift the free market from the public domain into a private affair for billionaires. Now, why is he talking like this? It is because there was a $1.7 trillion floor. This was roughly 94 times trailing revenue. The most expensive stock in the S&P 500, Palantir, trades at 67 times sales. Meta went public, growing 66% a year at 28 times revenue. Google, growing 240%, went out at 10. Value SpaceX three segments at twice what their public rivals command, a deliberately softball exercise, and you reach $1 trillion, which is still not $1.76 trillion. And Goldman Sachs, where I briefly worked, very briefly, they expect SpaceX's AI revenue to increase 100-fold by 2030. Now, I certainly don't believe that. Do you, Glenn?
I'm less skeptical than the colleague you just cited, but I hope that I am not among those who I think are fundamentally launching tulips to space, and then see everything burst in the sky above them. SpaceX is unquestionably the leading business in the industry and is qualitatively ahead of all others. But from that, I think, objectively true statement to saying that it really should be the only stock one owns and control all stock markets everywhere is delusional.
exactly. And the total addressable market that Usama points out is $26.6 trillion. That is nearly the size of the entire US economy, of which 22.7 trillion is filed under enterprise AI. That's about 30 times the size of the enterprise software market that actually exists. So I have, I have worked in deals before. In my earlier incarnation as a corporate lawyer, I was a very junior grunt when Ferrovial bought BAE for a pricely sum, I believe, at that time for $19 billion. Please don't crucify me if I'm getting my numbers mixed up a little bit, because it was a while. And I have a brother who works in capital markets, and I do not know of a single professional who is entirely in agreement with these numbers. In fact, off the record, they use lots of colorful language on the record because they are scared of losing business. None of these bankers, whether they are at Goldman, whether they are at Davis, or whether they are lawyers at Davis Polk, whether they are at any top bank or any top law firm, they're willing to say a single word against this IPO. But it's interesting how private comment and public comment diverge so dramatically. So I'm quite skeptical.
Well, I'm sure I will. I'm sure I will offend any number of people listening to us and anyone who hears me later. But the data is pretty telling. I mean, it cannot be challenged that 95% of the world's financial experts, stock market experts, underperform a randomly chosen portfolio of stocks over a period of 10 years, and it's 85% over a period of 5 years. So the insights that one has to something that cannot be predicted are zero, but the fees are usually 2%. So with SpaceX, the fact is that when the Starship, which is the name of the rocket that they're developing and quite near to having operational, comes into operation, it will lower the cost of launching a kilo to space by a minimum of an order of magnitude, from $5,000 per kilo to 500. And it could be substantially more than that, a greater reduction. No other company is within many years of being able to replicate that. And so the interest and the assessment that SpaceX is something different is correct. From that, however, to say that it is worth more than the GDP of the United States or something like that is just absurd.
And this raises problematic questions about relaxing all sorts of rules for listing on the markets. It raises questions as to how to arrive at valuations. It raises massive questions about conflicts of interest. But we will park that because this is not an analysis of SpaceX IPO. We will move on to the rocket-like rise of Zohran Mamdani within the Democratic Party. Left-wing challengers have ousted 2 House Democrats in New York on Tuesday. We are recording this on Wednesday, 24th of June. And Republican Dan Goldman has lost in a landslide to Brad Lander. And they all want to vanquish Trump's fascism. Representative Adriano Espilet, I don't know if I'm getting the pronunciation right, has lost to Daria Liza Avila Chevalier, a pro-Gaza activist who had never sought office before. Claire Valdez, another Mamdani ally who rallied with Bernie Sanders and Mamdani, won an open seat over Brooklyn's borough president. And her slogan was Solidarity Forever, Abolish ICE, Free Palestine, Organize Your Union, and Join DSA. I think DSA is Democratic the Democratic Socialist Alliance. So the winds of change are blowing in many directions. And this perhaps is because this wind towards the left is coming at a time when the US economy is increasingly reliant on tech and rich people, while consumer industries and poorer people are falling down. We know from data this month that traditional consumer goods companies are struggling. The Financial Times reported this, no less, and that is not a Marxist paper. They've been hobbled by insurgent rivals and flat population growth. Rich people's wealth is being boosted by the surging stock market. Moody's chief economist told Bloomberg that should there be a market tumble, which Glenn and I expect, which many other people expect, the economy would be extremely vulnerable. The lower half of wage earners in the US have barely seen wage growth for a year. And this month, data came out, which was in keeping with data that has come out earlier, that 37% of Americans could not cover an unexpected $400 expense. Or I'll repeat, 37% of Americans could not cover an unexpected $400 expense from cash or savings. In 2021, the same survey found the figure to be 32%. So in 5 years, from 2021 to 2026, the figure has gone up by 5%. So 1% a year.
If I could add one,
yes,
I think, corrective to what you said, you focused on the past year of largely stagnant wages for the working, wage-earning Americans, and I'm sure that's true. But it's true more broadly for the past decade and longer. Wages for most Americans have been, after inflation, compensation calculations and so on, roughly flat. And when you add to that the top 1% of the nation's population holds over 30% of all of the nation's wealth, and the bottom 50% holds 2.7%, I think it is, of the nation's wealth, with stagnant wages. And then you add to that the fact that inflation is, on the whole, low at the macro level. But when you look at the critical items that on which an average person bases his decisions and derives his perception of reality, the cost of transportation, the cost of home insurance, the cost of medical care, and the cost of certain foodstuffs, all of those are not up just 2.8% or whatever the current inflation rate is, but up roughly 40%. And that explains why the indebtedness of the American citizen has been increasing in the following way. Credit card debt has been rising. This is why the economy has not shown a downturn in consumer spending, because people are using their credit cards to cover those specific items that I mentioned because they want to have a roof over their head. But credit card debt cannot continue to rise forever. And given all of these factors, the tensions that you describe, Atul, I think continue to be misunderstood or ignored by the powers that be, because that is describing the reality for most Americans. And it explains why I struggled for so long to understand why there was such disaffection among the American people when the macro indicators seem to indicate a strong economy. And in the macro sense, that's true. But if you have money, then you don't have a problem. And not everyone has money. That is the problem.
Exactly. And speaking of problems, it's not just the US seeing disaffection. If we go all the way to India, and the reason we are going all the way to India is because the Supreme Court the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, called the youth, who are largely unemployed, cockroaches. It wasn't the wisest use of term. Remember, this is not a politician. This is the Chief Justice of India, the CGI. a recent Boston University graduate started, I suppose, as more as a kind of social media protest, if nothing else, a party called the Cockroach Janta Party, which is the Cockroach People's Party. And it grew exponentially, and it grew speedily, and it went up like one of Elon Musk's rockets. And it soon, this Cockroach Janta Party had more followers on Instagram than the Bharatiya Janata Party, the ruling BJP, which was hilarious. And this is coming because a lot of the young are unemployed. A medical school entrance exam basically had to be cancelled because the paper had leaked. The school board exams, the equivalent of GCSEs, say in the UK, or A-levels in the UK, or Abitur in Germany, or any school leaving exam anywhere in the world, it turns out that the copies had been corrected or marked inaccurately. Half the answer script was somebody else's. Half of it was obviously another person. So it was, shall we say, a tragedy of errors, not a comedy of errors. And this is Asia. So students often commit suicide if they get bad grades. Entrance exams decide the trajectory of your life. And all of these are headed by Indian Administrative Service officers, people who clear one exam and they move in from agriculture to running school boards or exams. And these are punishment postings. And all of these institutions basically are not working. And as is the judiciary. If you go to court, you can be in court for 20, 30 years. So the youths who do not have jobs, who do not have prospects, who have no faith in institutions, who actually no longer have faith in the republic itself, they have taken to a protest that may not be necessarily very constructive, but it is certainly indicative of the disaffection. And it's not just the US going through this, but also India, and I'm sure other parts of the world. Perhaps inflation is partly to cause, perhaps the cost of living is at fault, perhaps the US-Israel-Iran war has pushed things over the edge. We'll come to that later. But things are not right in many, many, many democracies around the world, especially the poorer ones that are more vulnerable. Now, moving on from the poorer democracies to the richer ones, Norway, a rich democracy, is reconsidering joining the EU because the world has moved from a benign world, in the words of the country's foreign minister, to a crazy world. Now, remember, the Norwegians voted in 1972 and 1994 to remain outside the EU. However, tariff wars with Washington and NATO's growing divisions have pushed them towards the EU. The EU obviously would be keen to admit Europe's biggest oil and gas producer. They are indeed looking to add new members. They are not looking to add the UK, or they are less open to a return of the UK, but nevertheless, the EU may expand. Whilst Norway is planning to rejoin the EU and the EU might be planning to expand, the Trump administration has been expanding the role of the government in the economy. We are moving to some kind of dirigiste economy, which basically is a tradition from the Spanish, or rather the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the French free Catholic countries, wherein an elite at the capital decides the allocation of capital. So people sitting in Madrid or Paris decide how the economy should function. This was championed at its height by Jean-Baptiste Colbert, not Stephen Colbert. Just this was a finance minister of Louis XIV. And the Trump administration, perhaps thinking, that Donald Trump is the modern Louis XIV, has decided that the government is very wise, is full of the smartest people on the planet, and they've decided to invest $2 billion in 9 quantum computing companies. This is a major bet on nascent technology. The idea is to make them commercially viable. The US government will receive some equity. It will act like a sovereign wealth fund. Note that the US recently backed a rare earths magnet maker and a mining company. So the idea is that...
If I could jump in for a moment, wearing
Yes,
my 17th century hose, there's an ironic element to what you're describing, which is not humorous. It's something that people, I think, should really be aware of, because we do know what the future contains, given the past in this. Where does this dirigisme, this directed economy model come from? As you say, it comes from the French Colbert, who centralized the state and thought that, in a way, it's the Platonic ideal that the wisest men should make the decisions and centralize power so that it can be efficient. And that all sounds quite rational. But it was also chosen during the Cold War context, when the clash was between the communist ideal embodied in the Soviet Union and then in Beijing, and the capitalist one in Washington. But the French, of course, never wanted to be subservient to anyone, certainly not to the United States, or to this Anglo-Saxon free market capitalism. And so, in part, for political reasons, in part for geostrategic ones, and in part out of heritage, they refused this laissez-faire, pure Western capitalism model, as they rejected is what I should say, the totally centralized state industry nationalization model of of communism. And they came up with this dirigiste economy. However, the empirical results are categorical, that the economies that grew the fastest, that therefore had the means to respond to various social issues, whether it's healthcare or paving a road or buying a bullet, whatever it is, guns and butter, we used to say when I was studying economics, the most successful economies were those that are the capitalist ones. The least successful, in fact, catastrophically failures, were the communist ones, because communism is actually antithetical to any sort of functioning of an economy. And those in the middle were the dirigistes, the directed economies, which chose certain sectors. However, we also know that nationalized industries almost invariably underperform the private industries because of the laws of economics and the efficiencies that come from competition. So we know what is happening. And Donald Trump and his disciples, who are the theoreticians, believe that they're making these efficient decisions. It's always attractive to say, I know better what should be done, and I control the levers of power, so I'm going to do this because we need to have quantum computers. But the fact is that over time, this is not a short-term phenomenon, over time, none of the national efficient industries tend to compete or develop new techniques as efficiently as in a more capitalist economy. Now, you can direct resources more successfully as in a centralized state, as Beijing shows by all the cemented pores and various other things it does quite successfully. But whereas we are now benefiting, Americans aren't for domestic reasons, but the world is benefiting from Chinese solar technology and EV technology. I think it's 20 of 21 Chinese EV companies are running at a loss, which means that the Chinese taxpayer in communist China is subsidizing the development of an industry at a loss for everyone, except for the benefit of the consumers who are buying it. So that's what will happen with this dirigiste scheme of the Trump administration.
Well, the dirigiste scheme is to put money in quantum computing, fusion power, self-driving cars, and AI. The idea is that the technologies of the future cannot be owned by China. and therefore the technological edge should remain with the US. That's the logic. The US is also worried about dwindling cache or cache of munitions. Trump has asked defense companies to produce more weapons. Car companies with excess capacity apparently could also help produce missiles. Stockpiles are now low because of the war. Congress is looking to bar defense contractors from executing stock buybacks or paying dividends without Pentagon approval. To be honest, I have some sympathy with that, because in some ways what has happened in the stock market is far too much manipulation. And it's not just the SpaceX IPO, but the chief executives in America have run amok. There's very, very little control by shareholders. A lot of money they use to effect buybacks and boost up their own shares, and therefore, because they own shares or stock options in the company, their personal wealth rises. So I'm not sure I entirely oppose the Congress there, but I don't know if this directive, or this dirigiste model of saying increase production, stop the waves like King Canute, and the waves will stop. All of this is happening whilst Chinese ascendance in biotech, not just all the industries I mentioned, is raising alarm. Lilly entered into a latest agreement with a Chinese drug maker. Pfizer announced a tie-up with a Chinese firm to develop drugs. And now people, or let's say some of the experts in the field, are saying biotech is the latest battleground, and we cannot let China take over biotech as it took over electric vehicles. This raises into questions all sorts of things: innovation, process expertise, cost efficiency, labor, talent, capital, global supply chain.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.